Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. The HiT cast offers a weekly look at Hollywood from a conservative point of view. Sick of media bias infecting Hollywood headlines? Tired of stars insulting your views? HiT has your back. Now, here's your host, Christian Toto.
Welcome to episode 26 of the Hollywood in Toto podcast. This week we're talking with Brett R. Smith, a talented graphic artist and one half of the team behind the best-selling Clinton Cash graphic novel. But before our chat, I wanted to talk a little bit about Last Man Standing. That's the ABC comedy with Tim Allen that recently got the axe. And that's where the story gets interesting. The incident tells us plenty about Hollywood, the media, and the culture at large. Now, the backstory is simple. The show was very successful, big ratings for ABC, but ABC said it was too expensive a proposition, citing some fairly legitimate reasons, talking about how they don't own the show in particular, so some of the residuals don't go their way. And also, this is an older show with a lot of famous folk in it, specifically Allen, and it's expensive to produce. So those are all fairly reasonable explanations, but it doesn't quite add up, and here's a number of reasons why. First of all, I want to go back in time just a little bit to late last year. That's when Channing Dungey, who's the president of ABC Entertainment, had this to say about content in the age of Trump. She said, with our dramas, we have a lot of shows that feature very well-to-do, well-educated people who are driving nice cars and living in extremely nice places. And there's definitely still room for that. And we absolutely want to continue to tell those stories because wish fulfillment is a critical part of what we do as entertainers. But in recent history, we haven't paid enough attention to some of the true realities of what life is like for everyday Americans in our dramas. That's a pretty insightful bit of commentary. She said it after Trump's election victory, and it was clear what she was talking about. And she wasn't the only one. There were some other people who, in the entertainment field, said, hey, wait a minute. Are we truly addressing America as it's constituted as we head into 2017? This election took everyone by surprise. What does that mean? Well, flash forward a few weeks, and now ABC is canceling a show that really epitomized that red state sensibility. Tim Allen's Mike Baxter on that particular show was a conservative, and he'd often blast liberals like Obama and Hillary Clinton. That made him pretty darn rare when it comes to broadcast television. There aren't that many characters like him, frankly, that aren't the butt of a joke, that are actually at the center of the story. And they're the good guys, so Mike Baxter wasn't a perfect character, but he was the hero of the show, and now he's gone. Now, why would ABC do that if they wanted to have more representation? Well, it doesn't quite add up. And yes, there are some financial considerations behind the show, but it didn't sound like there was much negotiation behind the scenes. It sounded like they wanted to get rid of it. Meanwhile, here's a show with some true staying power, with a guy who's been on TV for 30 years now, who's basically an institution, at least on the small screen. Why do you cut that off so quickly? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, if you want to get a little conspiratorial, ABC is also the network that produced The Path to 9/11. That was the miniseries that was a little bit critical of President Bill Clinton when it came time to the run-up to the terrorist attacks of 9/11. Now, that particular show got ratings as well, pretty big ratings for the time, and it's never been seen since. You can't rent it, you can't buy it, you can't stream it. It is gone. And ABC, with Bob Iger as the head, has never really had a great explanation, frankly, for why that particular miniseries is unavailable. Now, if you've ever been to a Best Buy or looked on Amazon.com, everything is available. The best shows, mediocre shows, terrible shows, shows you would never want to see once, let alone twice. You can find them on streaming, you can find them on DVD or Blu-ray. Just about everything is available, unless it's a sort of legal tie-up where there's a reason why, for copyright purposes, they can't get that content out to the masses. But The Path to 9/11 has never been out, never been released, and never been shown more than that one single time. This is the same company that just cut the ties to Tim Allen and Last Man Standing. Is it a coincidence? I don't know. Now, Allen himself was pretty quiet initially, but then later on he said he was stunned and blindsided. He put that out via his Twitter account, and that up until now has been his only statement regarding the show's cancellation. Now, Fox flirted with possibly bringing back Last Man Standing. That seems like that's gone away. And I'm starting to hear that some of the writers in the show are getting other gigs. And you can understand that. They've got families to feed. They've got work to be done. And if that show is gone, they've got to find other gigs before the work dries up. So that's understandable. So the chances of Last Man Standing coming back are getting slimmer and slimmer. But the bottom line is, here's a rare show that spoke to a segment of the country that rarely gets addressed. It's gone, and there are few regrets. And just one little final note here. I found it interesting that some people, particularly entertainment journalists on Twitter, were tut-tutting that conservatives were all aghast at the situation and that they didn't understand the economics behind the cancellation. Well, you know what? I don't know if those particular journalists understand the ramifications of the show or understand what it means to be a conservative and to see very, very little representation on TV these days, particularly in an age where every other TV show is talking about the resistance or she persisted. Shows like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Supergirl. It's getting more and more commonplace for those kind of political statements to be pushed into the public's face, whereas Tim Allen's character, now he's missing in action.
From CBN Documentaries comes a new film, In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem, the extraordinary true story of the Six-Day War.
Our goal is clear: to wipe Israel off the map.
For 6 days in 1967, surrounded by enemies on all sides, Israel stood alone.
The time has come
and changed history.
to begin a battle of annihilation.
In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem. In select movie theaters for a special one-night event Tuesday, May 23rd. For theaters and tickets, go to inourhands1967.com.
The latest hit tip of the week is Still Mine, a movie I fell for a couple of years ago, and now it's available for all to see if you're a subscriber to Amazon Prime. James Cromwell stars as a farmer who wants to build a new home for his wife. She's older, like he is. She's played by Genevieve Bujold, and she's suffering from the early stages of dementia. So his character, a farmer, wants to build a house. He's got the skills, he's got the wood, he's got the passion behind it, and he knows that if he builds a house that's better equipped for her, the two of them can stay together longer. They can be husband and wife for a while before maybe she has to go to a hospital when he can't take care of her anymore. But big government standing in the way, permits and procedures and rules and regulation, they're all there to block him from making this simple home for his wife. You know, it's funny, there's a very libertarian streak behind the film, and yet the actor is involved, particularly James Cromwell, is a very progressive star. And obviously he reached out to this material because it's a great role for him, and it's a very good movie. You can understand why any actor, no matter their ideology, wouldn't want to kind of jump at this role and kind of take it for all it's worth. And Cromwell does that. He's been a great character actor for years. So getting the chance to star, to be the leading man in a film, certainly was rewarding, and it's also rewarding for people who check it out. Now, this is a film that's not a huge presentation, no big budget. It's a smaller, quieter character study. But it's a beautiful film all the same. It's certainly worth your time. So, Still Mine on Amazon Prime. Check it out. And if you like it, let me know on Twitter. Or maybe if you don't like it, if you don't agree with me, you can lash at me via @HollywoodInToto.
Nobody puts baby in a corner.
You will believe a man can fly.
That's right. I'm getting too old for this.
Get to the chopper if you feel lucky, punks.
Buzz, your girlfriend. Woof.
Yo, Adrian.
Hey, we're covering all these franchises and more over here on iTunes at the Franchise Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Ehrenberg.
And I'm your host, Henry Papali, and check us out, folks.
What's your favorite scary movie? Probably being covered. All right. Take the red pill.
Now, let's get to our interview with Brett R. Smith. Brett's an artist, graphic designer, a colorist. He's also the man who made this podcast's logo. He's worked for some of the bigger comic book companies, including Marvel and DC. But perhaps he's most famous for the artwork behind the graphic novel Clinton Cash, which took some of the wind out of Hillary Clinton's campaign sales, and rightly so. You can hear him along with Lisa DePasquale on the Political Punks podcast as well. Here's my interview with Brett R. Smith. Well, you know, I'm as I like to say, I'm a former failed art major, and obviously it didn't pan out for me, but I'm just kind of curious. It sounds like you had a more traditional art career, at least the early going of your educational journey. Can you talk a little bit about that? And were you the kind of kid who was drawing in 5 and 6 and 7 and knew this was kind of the direction you wanted to go in?
Yeah, according to my dad, I was basically holding a pencil and drawing and tracing when I was really little. We're like talking 4 or 5 years old. And I was also really into comic books at that age as well. There was a newsstand at the old Terminal 2 Sky Harbor International Airport that we used to go. When I'd fly back to Denver to see my mom, we'd always pass by this newsstand, and I couldn't I'd always have to have a comic from it, and usually, and I still have some of those comics actually. One of which is an old Flash Gordon comic that I kept all these years. But there was also an arcade near the newsstand too, which we used to visit as well before I would jump on a plane and go back to Denver, which is where I lived with my mom as a kid, and then I came to live with my dad when I was like 9 or 10. But my folks were always great. They were always encouraging me. That they obviously bought me the comics. They also put me in art lessons as a kid, private and group lessons.
Wow.
Yeah, so they obviously saw not only my own personal interest, but also national talent there, and they were always very supportive and wanted to foster it and encourage me. So I was really fortunate.
Gotcha. As a working artist today, and this is something that I ask different cartoonists when I meet them for work, do you carry around a scratch pad when you're sort of off the clock? Are you still drawing and tinkering and noodling, or do you kind of approach it more of this is your career, this is your craft, and when I'm off the clock, I'm listening to music or playing golf or playing tennis? Or I'm kind of curious, does it sort of stay with you all the time, or do you need kind of a break from that creative output?
Most of the time that I spend doing creative stuff is for projects, and I don't really necessarily sketch or do stuff kind of off the clock. I do try to use that time to do other things and kind of unwind and focus on other things. But the one thing I do now, which I didn't used to do, which is, my mind is always working and it's always turning, and you're always encountering things, whether it's news or whether it's something you see. So ideas are always forming in my mind. Uh-huh. And one thing that I've gotten into the habit of doing is writing things down. Because it's like, it's like that great Mad Men episode, Achilles, where Paul has the great idea, and then all of a sudden he, gets drunk and forgets it. And, and then he has to go and confess to Don, I had a great idea and I didn't write it down. And Don just kind of sighs and says, I'm glad that's never happened to me, because it sucks, man. I mean, sometimes you have these great ideas and you think, well, sure, I'll remember that later. It was such a great idea. It was such, it was this really bright light bulb that went off inside my mind. But, it's amazing how those things just kind of disappear into the ether unless you write them down. So I have sticky pads that if I have, an idea for a political cartoon or for just anything. I've really gotten into the habit of writing it down, which is also something that Michael O'Donoghue, famous from the National Lampoon and Saturday Night Live, used to do. He used to write down his ideas and put them in like a little recipe box, like literally a cookbook recipe box. And then later on, whenever there'd be something that would come up, he'd be like, yes, I have something for that, and flip through it. So that's kind of what I try and do.
That's funny. There's a documentary about Joan Rivers a couple of years ago, and she literally had like a card catalog full of all of her jokes. It was pretty fascinating to watch, but she took it very seriously. Talk a little bit. I understand. I was reading a little bit of a background, and you mentioned that the Monica Lewinsky scandal kind of got you engaged in politics, and it kind of really kind of sparked you. Now, obviously, the story had everything. It had sex, it had drama, it had intrigue, and political shenanigans.
And pizza.
That's right. What connected to you? Was it all of the above? Was sort of that perfect storm, or was there something else about it that kind of made you more of a political creature in a way?
I remember watching all of that, and at the time, I for some reason I wasn't watching Fox. I was watching Chris Matthews a lot, who surprisingly enough was very, kind of straight down the middle when it came to impeachment. He was really highly critical of Bill Clinton at the time. And thought this, older man taking advantage of this 21, I think she was like 20 or 21. She was nearly the same age as Chelsea, which was something that he was bringing up quite a bit at the time. And I remember just kind of being, sort of like, this is if this happened in the private sector or the real world, any one of us would have gotten the boot. And that's just kind of the blatant hypocrisy of the whole thing. Really bothered me, and then also what I also kind of found really kind of fascinating was the fact that the Constitution had a process for impeaching the president, and I was kind of like batting back between MSNBC and Chris Matthews and C-SPAN, watching the House go through these machinations and this whole process, which I found actually just really fascinating. I was just kind of like, wow. These quote-unquote old dead white dudes, the founders, they actually had something planned for this. I mean, we're talking 200 plus years ago, and we're still doing this, and this idea of America is really just that. It's an idea, and it's probably something that they never figured would go this long necessarily. And that's kind of what kind of sparked my interest. And then as I started to, get deeper and deeper into it, I realized that, this party, this Democrat Party was just something that I just didn't identify with at all. And then I started to kind of get into William F. Buckley and listening to Rush. And that's when I kind of started, really started to understand who I am, who I identify with, and what my own personal ethos and philosophies, the center-right kind of philosophies spoke to me far more than what the leftist philosophies did. And I was kind of like Andrew Breitbart. I was sort of a liberal by default, as a younger kid. Got a lot of my information and news from Kurt Loder and MTV, and which is probably precursor to the Daily Show news, and also probably even Dennis Miller and Weekend Update, which is definitely the precursor to the satirical content of Colbert and Jon Stewart.
Yeah.
So when I started to actually get real news and actually get information from legitimate sources like Rush, that's when everything started to change within me. I've also got to mention that I started my own business when I was 18, and I was freelancing and doing commissions, artwork for people. So, by the time impeachment had rolled around, I was cutting checks to the IRS every year on the 15th, and that changes a man's attitude in a big way.
Yeah,
for sure. Really does.
To quote Raising Arizona, the government do take a bite, don't you?
that movie is just so classic. It's so fantastic, and it was filmed in so many places near my house, near my own stomping grounds, near Arizona, or near Phoenix and Scottsdale. There's a place called Greasewood Flats, which is now a defunct restaurant, which is where they filmed that final battle sequence between the biker and HI and what was Holly's name? Edwina, yes. So that's we used to go up there almost every Friday night and go and have steaks and a baked potato. And it was a great old restaurant where if you walked in with a tie, they would cut it off and staple it to the ceiling. So this whole place, which was kind of like this little Western, like frontier kind of looking storefront and restaurant, the inside was just littered. The ceiling was littered with ties. It was really funny, really funky place. And that whole area up there has now just been completely and totally gentrified. And all that stuff has been torn down. It's all gone.
That's a shame. I was going to say I need to make a road trip to just check out those locales. But let's flash forward from sort of the Lewinsky to the modern-day Clintons. Obviously, last year's Clinton Cash was a huge hit for you. Talk about sort of looking back on it with a few months of perspective. Why did it matter? Why did it resonate? And do you find others in your niche maybe looking to kind of duplicate it?
I don't see anybody trying to duplicate it. Unfortunately, I think what we did was effective because we basically kind of took the same kind of tactics that the left uses on us all the time, which is what I get back to Stewart, Colbert, the late night comedians, which just constantly lampoon and use satire and parody and mock our side all the time. And there's nobody really on our side who really gives it back. You could say that Greg Gutfeld is one guy who I think does give it back and does his own thing. Tom Shalhoub as well with Red Eye, which is now, I think, a podcast. They've gone from the TV show to the podcast, which is great. So at least we still have some semblance of Red Eye. But the whole thing with Clinton Cash was, I think the reason why it was so effective was because we were able to give back to the left the same kind of mockery and satire and tell the truth through humor, which is a great vehicle to tell the truth because it brings people together. And it's very disarming rather than, kind of your standard polemics where you're just lecturing and making some impassioned argument, which, that doesn't, people like to come to conclusions on their own. And when you're doing that, they tend to tune you out. But if you can tell a story and you can be funny about it, or you can set up some circumstances with some really funny imagery, I think that goes a whole lot further and is more effective than any kind of just political ad or white paper or lecture. But we were really, really blessed because we had tremendous talent on the book, and on top of that, we also had the timing, which was really right, with the book coming out in August on the heels of the election. I really wish it would have come out maybe a couple months sooner, so it would have given us more time to promote and get the word out. We literally kind of ran out of time, but it. I think we did move the needle, especially with young people. I recently spoke to a fellow who was one of Trump's technical advisors for the campaign, and he's a millennial, and he said that Clinton Cash was a big time. The graphic novel was a huge favorite amongst the Trump staff, and a lot of the young people on Trump's staff. They loved the book. Like most people, it's hard to get through the original one because it's a tough slog. It's a lot of details and it's a lot of connect the dots, and you almost kind of feel like you need a highlighter. But with our version, it's obviously a quicker read, and it's entertaining, which is something that I wish that our side would do more of, which is inform and at the same time educate, but do it while you're entertaining, which is what the left does, and they do it so well most of the time,
Yeah. Well, let's, I think at this point right now in our culture, conservatives, for better or worse, are getting shellacked by pop culture. I mean, you talk, Supergirl and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. are talking about the resistance, and of course, late night speaks for itself. What's the response? I mean, conservatives can complain on Twitter, and there's no real late night show that speaks to them literally or figuratively. What do you do when you're faced with this kind of sort of uniform attack on a president, and also not just Trump, who brings on a lot of it himself, but his party, his administration, his views, his stances? I mean, they're all sort of fair game, and it's unbelievable sort of what's going on. So, from your perspective as an artist and someone who's proactive, what's the reaction that we should have?
I think the reaction that you see like on 4chan and with kind of the meme wars that have gone on, I think that's a natural reaction, and I think it's organic, and I think it's grassroots. And 4chan is just this army of amazingly bright and interesting people who post all kinds of crazy stuff. It's really kind of the Wild West in a lot of ways, especially the poll board. Some of the stuff on there is, some of it I agree with, some of it I don't. Obviously, there's obviously a range there, but what those guys do is kind of what we did at Clinton Cash. They mock, they use satire, they make fun of the left. You can't take these people seriously because they're not serious. And the one thing that the left hates more than anything is when you mock and you lampoon them. They're very good at dishing it out. We all know that. But they're horrible at taking it because they're really not used to our side giving it back. They're used to us having to take it, and then we go out and we go on defense. We go out and we virtue signal. So if I could say one thing that we need to stop doing is virtue signaling. And it's one of the reasons why I supported Trump, and I still support Trump, because he operates in a virtue signal-free zone. And guys like Milo also operate in a virtue-free signal zone, and that is the best place to come from. We need to stop being on defense. And a great example is a Democrat or a liberal or the media come out and they say, Republicans hate children, or they want to starve the children, maybe because they want to cut the school lunch program, or they want to cut Social Security or whatever and make old people eat dog food. And then Paul Ryan or somebody comes out and says, well, that's blatantly untrue. I love all the children, and I love all the children in my district, and they're wonderful people. The majestic nature of the children in my district. I never want to do anything to upset that. Just defense, defense, defense. Virtue signal, virtue signal, virtue signal. We need to stop that and just start calling it out as complete and total utter nonsense and BS, and call it out for what it is, which is basically projection. It's a straw man argument, which is all the left has. Basically, they just argue with themselves. They never argue with us because they're always pitching this straw man argument, which is, I always say the leftists, I didn't give you permission to invite the straw man into this argument. Okay, so don't go there. And don't speak for me. Pull a Bender on him. Don't speak for me. I wouldn't speak for you. I don't even know your language. That's kind of what I do, and I think we need to stop virtue signaling and just go on offense and start mocking these people. Ben Garrison does a great job at that, and some of these people on 4chan with these memes, and I think we've won the meme war. I think part of Trump's success is part of the meme war and how we have the memes against Shia LaBeouf and Antifa. They're just hilarious. They're so funny and they're so creative, and I think that's really the way forward is stop virtue signaling, go on offense, because when you go on offense, that means that you typically have to get creative and you have to use your brain. And stop resorting to this constant defense, this defensive position, because then they get you to stop in your tracks, whatever we were doing. And you got to sit there and you got to play defense and explain to everybody and wring your hands and pearl clutch. And then, then obviously they move on to the next outrage. But I agree with Milo that the best answer in fighting the outrage culture, which is basically what the left is at this point, is providing them with more outrage, and like scanners, let's make their heads explode.
Good reference.
You're listening to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment.
One of the things I want to talk about, you've been in the comic book industry for a while, and you work with the major brands. I was kind of curious what your take is on Marvel Comics at the moment. There's been all these headlines about the social justice warrior angles, that sales are kind of decreasing. Fans, maybe they're kind of going away. Is it true? What's the sense you get either from your own perspective, maybe even just colleagues that you're in touch with?
Mm-hmm. Well, Marvel sales are really right now. They're at their lowest level. They're about the same level as they were in the 90s, in and around the time when they went bankrupt in 97 or 98. There's a great book called Comic Wars, which details the whole Marvel bankruptcy, which happened, I believe, in 96 or 97. And my older brother, Brian, was actually a part of the whole thing. He was working for a hedge fund at the time. It wasn't called a hedge fund back then. It was called something else. He's just an investment banker. But they had a bunch of other firms had loaned Marvel a ton of money. And Marvel was trying to merge with Toy Biz at the time, which would have alleviated a lot of the debt that they owed to all these firms, my brother included. And they said, no, that's not going to happen. If you're going to merge with Toy Biz, we're going to be in on it. So you're going to have to go BK in order to make this happen. And but at the time, their sales were just they were just very low. They were a lot of their sales were in the 20,000 range. Mm-hmm. And if you've got a 20,000 print run on a book, that's usually a death knell. It means that your book's going to get canceled. And about 30 of Marvel's titles over the last couple of months or quarters have been in the 20,000 range, one of which was this Black Panther spinoff called The Crew, which was kind of this social justice warrior type book. Mm-hmm. There was a couple other ones. There's 30 total that were all below a 20,000 print run. And those have all been canceled as of, I think, yesterday or the day before. So, and I don't hear anybody really complaining about it, to be honest with you. I think I hear a lot of people happy about it because it means that they're going to be returning to, they say they're going to return to just tell straight stories and bring back all of these characters which they had made gay or Asian or female. You got the Asian Hulk. Cap is now a member of Hydra. Iron Man is a black girl. This is just nuts. It's just completely retarded, and it's really kind of redefines, in my opinion, lack of creativity and lack of imagination. Those are all just sort of shortcuts and gimmicks to have little bumps of sales, which seems to be kind of the MO for Marvel these days, which is, it's just all short-term thinking. Let's go for a little bump in sales, something that'll get us, 3 or 4 months down the road, rather than going for the long game, which is what they used to do, and plan these stories and these arcs out over a year or 2 years, where you have longer runs rather than having like a 4-issue miniseries, you might have an 8-issue miniseries. It's similar to what's going on right now with DC and the Bane book that Chuck Dixon and Graham Nolan, 2 guys that were Clinton Cash contributors, they've got a 12-issue arc with Bane right now. It's called Bane Conquest, and the artwork is just beautiful. And the first issue came out. I haven't read it yet, but it's gotten great reviews. And part of the deal that Chuck and Graham worked with DC was, look, if you want us to come back and work on Bane, it's going to be a long arc. It's not going to be one of those wham bam thank you ma'am 4-issue series. So it's a great refreshing return to this longer format, which you can obviously tell a much deeper and richer and more entertaining story because you're not having to compress everything into 4 issues.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing. But the Marvel thing is crazy, man. I really don't understand what's going on other than, about 30 out of their 30 writers, if you go on their Twitter feeds and check it out, it's just this anti-Trump, anti-America, anti-flyover country triads and rants. It's really kind of scary. There's Axel Alonso recently said that Marvel readers don't want diversity, which is why they're canceling all these books, which are underperforming. I think Marvel has it backwards. I don't think it's not that the fans don't want diversity. It's that Marvel, on the inside doesn't want diversity. And all they got to do is go and look at their writers' Twitter feeds and see what they're saying about their audience. There's 60 million Trump voters out there. And like Michael Jordan famously said, Republicans buy sneakers too. And we want to be entertained. We want to buy comic books. But right now, they're not really writing comic books for us. They're writing comic books for, it's kind of like identity politics in a lot of ways, which is going on at Marvel, which I think is really kind of sad.
Yeah. Now, obviously, people are aware of your position, ideologically speaking. Has that hurt your career? I mean, you sound like you're a pretty busy fellow, and you've worked with the bigger companies, and you're still working, obviously. But have you had moments where you've realized that maybe you lost a gig because you were right of center, or someone actually said it explicitly to you?
Oh, I definitely believe there is definitely a blacklist, just like there is in Hollywood, which John Milius has talked about. There is definitely a blacklist in comics, and I've probably been subjected to it at this point with the success of Clinton Cash. So I haven't really gotten any work out of Marvel or DC in probably a year, and these were people that editors and people that I used to work with who on a pretty regular basis, and even if they didn't have work for me, they would always answer my emails and say, thanks for checking in. I don't have anything for you now, but as you know, that could change like tomorrow. So just keep in touch and I'll keep you in mind. That doesn't happen anymore. So, and I do know that I got a friend of mine who's a pretty big artist at DC who is going to be requesting me on a project here pretty quick. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Yeah. Because I am available. I do want to work with this guy. We're going to do some samples in advance to kind of kill any objection. But there is definitely a blacklist. It doesn't really exist at some of the smaller publishers. I still do work for IDW and a couple other small press. But Marvel, and the other thing that Marvel is doing, and more than DC, is Marvel has kept their page rates so low. There's been absolutely no change in the page rate in 15 years. And as you know, cost of living goes up, on average 2% every year. So you'd think that they'd be adjusting for inflation, but a lot of it is that Marvel wants cheap foreign labor. So they're keeping their page rates artificially low to basically do kind of what happened with animation back in the 80s, which is it got farmed out to South Korea and other places like Vietnam, where it's looked on as kind of grunt work. The Simpsons is not animated in America. The Simpsons is written here, and they do a lot of the pre-production, storyboards, prop design. But they put all that together in a package, and they ship it off to South Korea, and there's a studio in South Korea that animates every episode. Because not even Disney does any 2D animation in the States anymore. Nothing. They might do some 3D, but everything's been outsourced and farmed out for cheaper foreign labor overseas. And that's what's been happening with comics over the last really heavily over the last 4 years. And it's really sad because you open up a Marvel comic outside of really the Star Wars line, which is where they kind of have all their A-listers. You look at any other Marvel comic, and the only two Americans on these books are the writer and the editor. The rest are all foreign. And I don't have a problem with outsourcing, but I really do believe that it creates a real poisonous culture, in America, because I think that it's important to make sure that Americans are taking the jobs first, and then, if there's any overflow that Americans can't handle, then go and outsource somewhere else. But ultimately, I really believe in keeping jobs in America. I am an America First guy, and even if that means spending a little bit more money, I think it comes down to there's got to be something beyond the bottom line, and that really comes down to what kind of culture does this create, and does it breed resentment? Obviously it does, because I know a lot of really talented guys in America who can't get work because, they either charge more than what Marvel's willing to pay, or they just can't, seem to gain any traction with these editors. And I don't know where it comes from, whether it's from the board at Marvel and Ike Perlmutter, or whether it is just a conscious choice to cut costs. I mean, I have no idea what this is all about, but it's really disappointing, because there's a lot of amazing talent that is just untapped. And, Chuck and Graham haven't done anything for DC in a long time. So it was really great to see them come back with this new Bane series. And, proof is in the pudding. I mean, that first issue is amazing. Second issue looks amazing. Those guys are just legends. And, Marvel recently said that artists don't sell books. Even John Romita Jr. came out recently and said, that's not true. Me and all of the other artists contribute to these stories and contribute to these characters, whether it is collaborating with the writer during the process of making the comics, or doing the production design, or just elevating the story visually.
Yeah.
So,
when I was a kid, I knew all the artists that I loved to death, and I knew their names, and I knew their work, and I recognized them. So even as a youngster, I kind of recognized that, so I get your point.
And I was the same way, man. I mean, I had my heroes and my influences, and I used to pick up books specifically. I didn't really care what the title was. It's kind of like Brian Hitch. If Brian Hitch is drawing a book, I'll pick it up, because Brian Hitch is amazing. And the same with Mark Millar. Who did the Ultimates line. If Mark Millar is writing it, I will check it out. And and these writers, you get to know them, and you get to love them, and so you follow them wherever they go. And sometimes it's a great series, sometimes it's not. But I mean, that's part of the whole process and part of the fun.
Literally 2 feet from my desk right here where I'm recording this is How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way by Stan Lee and John Buscema. So.
Yeah.
Classic. I know that we talked off air, and you said there's certain things you can talk about as far as projects you're working on. Is there anything you can share with us, or that you can kind of tease us about, that we can see you next at some of the work you're doing?
Yeah, I've got a book that's coming out, a new graphic novel that I'm working on with a guy named Timothy Lim and another guy named Mark Pellegrini. And these guys are they're both millennials. They're both really, really talented, and they give me hope for the future, dude. I mean, these guys are Trump supporters. They're super talented, and we're producing a book which is basically a kind of like political cartoons. The book is done, and we have a publishing deal with Post Hill Press. So it'll be who also did the Trump coloring book, which has sold close to 300,000 copies.
Wow.
So we're going to be putting this book out. It's going to come out in Christmas. And I should be able to share some information about it soon. I'm waiting for it to get up on Amazon. So it's kind of like, there's no point in really talking about this or giving details until there's a place for people to go and actually pre-order the damn thing.
Gotcha.
And I just turned in my metadata the other day. So, we're just kind of on the heels of getting this thing up and ready. But it's basically a book of political cartoons, very cleverly disguised as a children's book. And it's got some really gorgeous artwork, and it is loosely based on Marlon Bundo, who is the Pence's pet rabbit, who they take with just about everywhere. And they recently took Marlon, I think, to South Korea when the Pences went down there, and they made some plush toys of Marlin, and they were handing them out to people. Uh-huh. So we're going to do something that's kind of fun and playful, and it's sort of a juxtaposition to what everybody says about Trump, which is he's, racist, sexist, homophobic, and, then when they run out of isms, they end up with a Hitler or a Nazi,
That's right. So, it's a natural creepy evolution. But
the default setting. Do you agree with me? Yeah, I do. You're my friend. Do you agree with me? No, I don't. You're Hitler. It's like this binary prison that progressives are in. It's a lack of complete and utter critical thinking skills. It's really sad.
Well, I appreciate your take on things, and one of the reasons why I've kind of reached out to you is I know that the way you're approaching pop culture is positive and impactful, and so I appreciate your time. Before we let you go, though, I always ask our Hollywood in Toto guests what they're watching on TV, what they're checking out on maybe at the local theater, maybe what they're reading these days. Any tips you can kind of give our listeners about what you're kind of grooving on that maybe they'll groove on too?
Yeah, dude, it's funny, and I almost kind of hate to admit this, but I'm kind of embarrassed. But at the same time, there's a good reason behind it. I've been immersing myself in 80s pop culture largely because I grew up during that era. Uh-huh. You and I did, and there was some just great pop culture from that era, great movies, great TV shows, and Amazon has a bunch of them on Prime. And two shows that I've been going back and rewatching because the writing is so good. One of which is Family Ties, which yeah, man. I mean, that was a show that was never missed in our household. That was on every night. And you and I grew up in the era where you had must-see TV and you had to be in a certain place at a certain time in order to catch certain shows. And a lot of the times you would do that with your family. So the whole family, gathers around the TV set, which is basically the hearth, and they watch The Cosby Show. And then after The Cosby Show, they watch Cheers. And then after Cheers, they watch Night Court or whatever. Or Alf, that was another one, or Max Headroom. These were great shows, or even like Sledgehammer. Remember that show? That show was hilarious.
It was a great show, very short-lived, maybe only one season. But,
one season, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Kind of a spin-off of Police Squad, and Dirty Harry. And so I've been going back and watching Family Ties, and I'm just kind of amazed at how good it is. Given that you obviously have some political friction, obviously, in the show with Alex, who's the conservative kid who's rebelling against his liberal, hippie Berkeley parents. And what I really find fascinating about that show is that there's nothing vicious or mean about it whatsoever. Even though they make fun of each other, and I watched an episode last night where Alex is making fun of the parents for reminiscing about their Berkeley days, and it's really funny, and it's also really poignant, and still all that humor still works today, but the difference being is that where everything these days is mean-spirited and snarky and nasty and vicious
and edgy.
And edgy, right. That stuff is very sweet. And it's very playful, and I think that's a commercial through line, which is obviously what I'm kind of looking for and looking at, what works. And I think that show could work today, and I think it could be hugely successful if it was given a reboot. It would be really over the top, given where the left is at this point. But I do think that Americans are hungry and looking for. I think they're kind of starved for shows that can tackle politics, but do it in a nice and polite way, and not be so edgy. That's kind of the thing that I think has kind of killed civility is this need that edginess or snarkiness equates humor, and it doesn't. It just doesn't. That's like saying, that dick and fart humor equates all humor. It doesn't. That's one form, and there's a place for it, but it's obviously not needed all over the place. Yeah. But that show is just brilliant, man. And it also made conservatism really cool because you were laughing at Alex making fun of his parents. That's what's funny about it. And I don't think they really ever intended Alex to be as cool and hip as he was. Reagan obviously had, and that whole era, that whole 80s time frame had a lot to do with it, because most people, the plurality of people loved Reagan from that era, as evidenced in his re-election in '84, which was a gigantic landslide. But Family Ties is one thing, great show, brilliant writing, and the other thing that I am halfway embarrassed to talk about, and this is actually good that I'm mentioning it to you, because you live in Denver, Colorado, and what show in the 80s was based in Denver, Colorado that was really, really famous?
Was it Boulder-based or Denver?
Denver.
I was thinking Mork and Mindy.
Well, that's one. That's Boulder.
Okay.
Yeah. And I watched that as a kid. I love that show. But I've been watching Dynasty, believe it or not.
Oh, my goodness.
I know. I'm not a closet Dynasty fan anymore. I've come out of the closet. This show, if you get past the first season, which does not have Joan Collins, she comes in right at the end. If you get into the second season, it's really good. It's obviously melodrama, and it's a spinoff of Dallas, which was all, Texas oil and JR and Larry Hagman, and obviously that's a great show as well. But I was just kind of curious, because I lived in Denver in the 80s, and I was kind of like, this show's based in, supposed to be based in Denver. It's got all these establishing shots of downtown Denver in the 80s. It's all filmed in California, obviously, because there's not one scene of snow in this whole show. I'm like, where's the snow, man? I mean, I realize there's 280 days of sunshine in Denver and Colorado, but come on. I mean, I'm like seeing palm trees pop up in the background. I'm like, who is this?
I think Joan Collins demanded no snow in her contract, so
exactly.
That's why.
But, honestly, dude, this show is hilarious. It's so over the top. It's so crazy drama. Joan Collins is just brilliant. John Forsythe is fantastic. Linda Evans is really good as well. She's kind of a doormat, though, which is part of her character. But it's a really funny show. And again, I'm just kind of going back and looking at some old-style writing. Old style, I don't want to date it that much, but, older writing from a different era to kind of compare, and contrast in comparison to what's going on today. And I just find it so refreshing, because they tell good stories, and there's real drama. They have great cliffhangers. And I got to admit, some of the drama is just so over the top. I just I just laugh out loud at some of the stuff. It's just like, no way. But, it's an interesting show, because it also has probably one of the first openly gay characters, in Stephen Carrington. I think of that era. I don't remember a whole lot of other shows that had openly gay characters and were dealing with that kind of subject matter within a family dynamic. So that's also kind of why it's interesting.
One show that did do that was Soap with Billy Crystal's character, but obviously much more humorous, and I think that came out a few years earlier than that.
That was a great show. That was a great show as well. There's so many good shows from the 80s that and I think what fascinates me about that era was that it seemed like, rather than today, where you're sort of taking an identity politics attitude towards whatever project you're writing for or you're working on. It's like with Marvel, let's cater to the social justice warriors and Black Lives Matter with this particular comic and these particular characters. Whereas in the 80s, it was more about writing kind of writing for everybody, trying to pull in as many people as possible, and kind of taking sort of an attitude of sort of like trying to create pop music within TV. It's like pop TV, where you're trying to hit the widest audience possible so you can have great ratings and appeal to everybody. And I think that's possible. I really do. It's just a matter of having the right type of writers and the right kind of creative, fostering that kind, producing that kind of show.
When I was a kid, I loved one of my favorite shows was What's Happening, a bunch of black children. And I'm a white kid, but I would never miss that show. It spoke to me, and I think there was an innocence and a kind of a connectivity that which you're mentioning, which maybe would be missing today. So that's a great point.
You know what? One thing that I liked was Good Times. I loved Good Times, and I loved the Jeffersons. And the fact that they were Sanford is great show, so funny and so politically incorrect in comparison to today. But these shows. It never crossed. I mean, I'm going to ask you: did it ever cross your mind that they were black?
I watched them religiously, so if it did, it didn't matter.
It didn't matter to me either. I thought I was just watching another family. I watched the Brady Bunch too, but it never crossed my mind or really made any difference to me. I just figured, well, they're different color, but they have the same problems and the same deal with the same crap as the white kids over in the Brady Bunch, you know. And I like the Brady Bunch because they had the extended family, which is kind of what I dealt with stepbrothers and stepsisters. So that's kind of what I identified with. But I used to love to watch the Jeffersons and especially Good Times for JJ. And, you know, and it never even occurred to me or really even made any difference that the color of these characters' skins. I mean, my best friend when I was 8 years old was a black kid, and it, you know, again, it's just kind of like it never even occurred to me. We used to play Lethal Weapon, and sometimes I'd be Roger Murtaugh, and sometimes Martin Riggs. So, you know what I mean? It just didn't matter. It was just all about let's use our imagination and have fun today, and you know, and be kids, and who gives a about this rest of this stuff, you know?
Yeah, well, I think if they made those shows today, they'd be more woke than necessary. And
well, you know, and we're so, you know, again, it's just like people, I think, you know, especially with Marvel or with TV shows today, you know, who try to, you know, make some kind of social statement. You know, people get enough of that during the day with the news and in their everyday lives. And I think, you know, I mean, for myself, I want to go and escape all that stuff when I watch a show or I disappear into a comic. I mean, I don't know how you feel about it, but that's kind of the last place that I really want to see it. I don't think it really belongs there. And in the 80s, the writers had the respect. They respected the audience's intelligence and understood that this is escapism. This is, you know, it's kind of like Cheers. You want to go where everybody knows your name and you can kind of disappear from the world's problems and just be with your friends. And that's kind of what those shows were in a lot of ways for people back in those days. They were like comfort food. It was like your friends that you saw every day or on Thursday nights at 8 o'clock. It's like Cosby Show, man. I mean, regardless of how things worked out for Bill, that show was a huge, huge cultural influence during that era, and a very positive one.
Oh, yeah, and across demographics, too.
Yeah, man. I mean, again, who cares that they're black? I didn't care. You know, I loved Rudy because she was so damn cute and so funny. Same with Vanessa. I loved Theo, you know, because I identified with him. And what drew me to that show was Bill Cosby's stand-up, Bill Cosby himself, which I think came out in 1980, which is still just hilarious. It's so funny. You know, now that you know kind of some of the details about Bill, it's, you know, you can't help but sort of think about things in a different light. But at the time, you know, he was as American as apple pie, man. And that show was just brilliant. Have you seen, what do you think about Roseanne coming back?
I think it's a terrible idea. I think that talent-wise, I think she's done.
Yeah.
I've seen her recent stand-up, and it's awful. And I think it was, you know, she had a fire in her belly. I don't mean that disparagingly. At that time, and she had a voice, and it was new, and it was raw, and it was blue-collar, and we needed it. And I don't think any of that applies anymore. So listen, I could be proven wrong, but it seems like they're redoing it for all the wrong reasons.
You know, she was a big Trump supporter, and still is. If you go on her Twitter feed, it's pretty it's pretty amazing. I think she's got a lot of guts. So I'm interested to see how they're going to do this, and if it's going to have any reflection on what's going on currently. You know, I mean, it's obviously not going to be some throwback. It's going to be a current show set in today's times. And I'm surprised they got everybody back. Surprised and not surprised. I'm not really sure what Goodman's doing, you know, other than losing a lot of weight. He looks great. But yeah, I mean, I kind of feel the same way. I'm just sort of like, you know, as much as I want that back, I don't know if it's necessarily relevant, and I don't necessarily know if it's going to work. And it's just sort of like everything that goes on these days in entertainment. There's nothing really new. Nobody wants to create anything new and take a risk. Everybody's just about, let's go into the toy box and, you know, pick out the Roseanne toy. Let's play with this month, or let's go do the A-Team, or let's recycle Miami Vice, or let's, you know.
Well, I think the reasons why you cling, or cling is the wrong word, but the reason why you still resonate with these older 80s shows is because something's missing today. And maybe the reason why we want to keep going back to older shows is because we recognize that's something missing and we want to recreate it. I mean, what do you think
that something missing is?
You know, the older I get, the more I'm nostalgic, so I get it. But I do think that the properties being revived maybe speak to that sort of entertainment first and foremost quality, perhaps. But I think in our culture, maybe we need those distractions. Maybe life is too complex and too thorny that they're going to have the comfort food of our past is a balm. I don't know. It's a bigger question than I can tackle, but all the reasons you mentioned that Family Ties works is refreshing and novel today. It would be subversive to have a Family Ties show that didn't mock the left or the right, but treated them lovingly and poked fun all the same. So we just don't get that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm kind of more interested. I do think that it's more nostalgic than it is. Where I'm coming from is I'm kind of going back and trying to look at the formula. I'm interested in how did these guys write so well for everybody? How do you hit that lowest common denominator in a lot of ways? Because that's interesting to me from a commercial standpoint moving forward with our own forms of entertainment and content that we need to be producing for people on our side, which is not so much producing people for, quote unquote, our side, but I do think that we can rope in a lot of people. I mean, the 60 million Trump voters out there, it's not all just hardcore Republicans. There's that, we won that election with a big tent, a big, diverse, interesting tent full of, fiscal conservatives, religious conservatives, gay conservatives. It's a big mishmash, which is partially how we won. And I'd like to help create content for those people because I think that they are vastly underserved and ignored by, what I call big entertainment. And it's not just big Hollywood, as Andrew coined. It's really big entertainment, because the left really does own not only Hollywood but TV and the media and tech, and they've got their claws into all of these things, and it's really affecting what they produce and who they produce it for. And I just see a huge audience out there just being ignored, which I think is really unfortunate. And they have money they want to spend. That's the other thing.
Well, it's an opportunity for people like yourself who recognize it, see it, and want to address it. And I think the more people do that, the more people will be rewarded, frankly. But
I agree. And I think when this thing drops with this Trump children's book thing, I'm definitely going to send you an advance copy because I'd love to get your take on it to see what you think.
Sure. I'd love to check it
out.
For sure. And Brett, before we let you go, why don't you plug away, as Martin Short used to say.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about your podcast and where else people can find you, either on social media or elsewhere.
Yeah, I do a podcast with Lisa DiPasquale called Political Punks. You can go to politicalpunks.com and check it out. We just interviewed Terry Shepard recently for his new show Hollywood Weapons. Have you seen that, dude? It's so awesome.
No.
Oh God, it's like MythBusters meets your favorite Hollywood action scenes.
Uh-huh.
And they, it's like the scene in Die Hard where he jumps off the roof and he crashes through the window. They recreate that to see if it would work. They also do the scene in Predator where Bill Duke, picks up the minigun and cuts down all that forest. And all the other guys come in and they all start shooting. They do Good, Bad, and the Ugly. They just did a Star Trek episode where Kirk fights the Gorn. It's really cool because. As a viewer, you grow up, you watch these movies, and you're kind of like, obviously when you're in the movie, you have the suspension of disbelief, and you're not thinking about the practicality of all of this stuff. But then guys like me walk out and they're like, could that really work? What would happen if I jumped off a roof tied to a fire hose and tried to, shoot through, smash-proof glass? How would it work? So Terry goes in and does all this stuff, and we've interviewed other people like Milo Yiannopoulos and others, Greg Gutfeld. So it's a fun podcast. Also, for people who have not read Clinton Cash, a graphic novel, I would encourage them to go online and invest $11.99 on Amazon and buy a copy. It is completely and totally relevant today as it was prior to Election Day, especially with all of this Russia. If you want to know who really colluded with Russia, it's called Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State. Bill's off giving speeches to some Russian bank for $500,000. Meanwhile, she is approving the transfer of 20% of U.S. uranium, which was also covered by the New York Times in a great article, as well as in our book, to the Russian government to go and build nuclear power plants in Iran. And, what's uranium? Nuke fuel. That's what it is. Let's be honest about this. So we encourage people to check that out. It's a great book. New York Times #1 bestseller, Amazon #1 bestseller, and also a piece of history at this point, because I think that between Peter's original book the Clinton Cash documentary / movie and the graphic novel, I think we definitely moved the needle and helped convince some younger folks who read the graphic novel that might have been thinking about going from Bernie to Hillary to not do that.
I concur.
Yes. Oh, that's about it. Otherwise, you can also go to my personal website, which is brs76.com, and you can check out some of my work there.
Very cool. Well, we'll have links to all this information on the show notes page, and that page will be hollywoodintoto.com/Brett-Smith. So, Brett, thanks again. We will probably be in touch maybe in the fall as your new book comes out, and thanks for checking in, and keep up the great work. We need more people like you. Well, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to check out hollywoodintoto.com for both the show notes and, of course, the latest entertainment news. Please follow me at Twitter @HollywoodInToto. And we'd love it if you leave a podcast review over at iTunes. See you next week.